Imagine having to work almost 2 years to get paid what your white male colleague got paid in 1 year alone. Imagine having to work twice as long. Well, for Latinas in the United States, that's the reality. On average, Latinas in the US are paid 46% less than white men and 26% less than white women. And this year, Latinas were the lowest paid group of women of any race. On Latina Equal Pay Day, we asked some of the most powerful Latinas across the US about their experience in the workplace, how the pay gap has impacted their lives, and what companies can do to close the gap and support Latinas in the workplace.
In 2020, I was working in the health space, and for obvious reasons, business was booming. My workload quadrupled and I needed immediate help. My VP created a new position 2 levels below mine and brought someone from another team to fill it. I was the initial approver on all job offers and noticed that this individual would be earning more than I did and significantly more than others at their same level. Even though they had 0 experience, I would have to teach them from scratch and closely supervise their work. I immediately pushed back and advocated for both myself and others. And the only response I got was that leadership did not see any inequity. Once I realized that they weren't going to do anything about leveling the playing field, I decided to choose myself and leave the organization. Thank you.
So sometimes I get asked, what did I do in my career to try to overcome the broken wrong? And I think there's 3 tips that I would share with others that worked for me. The first one is find an advocate. And this is more than just a mentor who's helping you grow skills in your job, but someone who is willing to speak out on your behalf when you're not in the room. And by finding people who really believe in you and are speaking for you, that gives you the edge to try to get the right assignments that get you the right promotions. The second tip is ask for what you want. For a long time, I assumed that people would see my hard work and immediately ladder up to thinking, I was promotional material. And I found quickly that it doesn't work that way. I really had to put down on a piece of paper, go meet with my boss, share with mentors and advocates. This is where I want my career to go. I want to be a CMO. And then ask for help. What are the experiences I need to get there? And once I was able to start to articulate my vision and sharing it with others, people kept me in mind when the right assignments were coming up. And that definitely helped me get experiences, which I will share tip number 3 is take a risk. Sometimes playing it safe doesn't get you noticed, but working on a high profile project definitely can. And just by showing you can knock a big project out of the park actually puts you in the pool of candidacy to get promoted and demonstrates that you're ready for that next step.
Given the single representation of Latinas in VP and in senior management roles, I think it's really critical for companies to be very intentional about how they're going to invest in Latinas to take on more senior leadership roles. And the why about that is very, very simple. If you look at millennial Latinas who have earned an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a graduate degree, that number has grown 70% in the last 2 decades. That's higher than Latinos and higher than non-Latinos alike. So it's all about how do we prepare them? And the challenge here is that education is just not enough. We have to be very intentional about what are all the skills necessary in order to get these Latina into these senior leadership roles. And I believe there's 3 critical areas that companies need to focus on. One is mentorship, the second is networking, and the third is professional communication styles. I personally have benefited from all 3 of those and was very fortunate to be with an organization that had programs that really supported women of color around these 3 specific areas.
So, there is it. I always say that the United States is the only country where if you speak another language, it looks bad on you. And if you speak English perfectly, but it's not your first language, it looks bad on you. In this country, if you have an accent, it acts against you. And so when I have been targeted because of it, or when I've been questioned because of my accent, I always get back to this person and I say, well, I wish you have a second language and you speak it as well as I speak English, because I run an organization and I deal with the highest decision makers and they understand me pretty well.
Why is it important to pay Latinas equitably? What would paying equitably do for our community or for our society? Okay, let's start with this number. If the 30 million Latinas that exist in the US got paid equitably, whenever it is that they're going to go through their 40-year work career, collectively, the $1.2 million collectively means $36 trillion that they're not receiving. So Latinas are being robbed today of $36 trillion collectively. Now, obviously, they would never be able to keep that money without paying taxes. So out of those $36 trillion, let's say 10 trillion would go to better schools and hospitals and parks and social services, etc., benefiting all Americans, not just Latinas. So Latinas not being paid equitably is robbing Americans of about $10 trillion of better services, right? For their kids, for their families, etc. So this is a problem that affects all Americans. Now let's talk about building generational wealth. $1.2 million invested in 40 years as they continue to work with monthly contributions during those 40 years and with compound interest with a return of, let's say, 10%, that means more or less $6 million. So the 1.2 million will get converted into more or less $6 million that today they're not making. What does that mean for a family? What does that mean for our communities trying to build wealth, trying to close the wealth gap? That would certainly be incredibly transformational.
There is so much impact because of that pay gap, certainly to community, but to family. Think about, that loss in income that should be, better reflected in someone's family well-being, in wealth creation for the next generation. Latinas and Latinos should be in a better position to make sure that they're building a nest egg for that next generation, just like anybody else, or making sure, they have investments and funds to, purchase a home, invest in college, and also invest in the markets. And this pay gap is really holding back Latinas and their families financially. And look, there's a benefit to consumers. Not only are Latinos growing as a percentage of consumers larger year over year growth than any other demographic, putting this money in Latino family pockets is good for the economy, and it's good for the overall growth of communities and the nation.
Lately, we have a saying, which is, let's get loud. Use your voice. We were raised as, calladitas te ves más bonita, right? We were raised with this saying of, be nice, lower your head, work hard. The results will show your value. The truth is that it doesn't sometimes. And so use your voice. There are many ways of using your voice. One is to, use facts. Use the facts that show that Latinas and Latinos, but in this case, Latinas, are breaking ground. They're creating wealth. They're founding businesses. They are raising kids that go to college. They are keeping families together. These Latinas are the biggest decision makers in buying decisions, right? At all levels, even cars that their husbands or their sons will use. They are very influential. So one is use your voice as Latinas. The second one is use your purse. Use the power of your purse. Support brands that actually have representation of people like you, not only in advertising, but also in their boards, in their C suite. Latina companies that are actually giving a procurement to your community. Use the power of your purse, support those brands, and make sure that other brands that are not supporting your community feel that you're not supporting them. Write letters, vote in the political arena. Your vote is your voice. And so, if we don't want to be invisible, we absolutely have to make ourselves not invisible. And a lot of that falls under our responsibility. And so, to your question, use your voice, speak out. Let's get loud.
I love this question because this comes at it for two angles. One is how Latinas can advocate for themselves. Too often we hold ourselves back by not asking when it comes time to reviewing bonuses and salaries. Be proactive. Say, listen, here's my track record of performance, and I deserve and should be considered, a raise or a bonus. I think we need to be asking that question and not necessarily wait for our supervisors and employers to ask, hey, or to tell us you're ready for a promotion, you're ready for a raise. I think it's also on us to make sure that each and every year we're asking that question. And it's a good thing. It means you're advocating for yourself. It means that you know your worth, and it means that you're demonstrating. One, you have your year-end accomplishments to stand by. So don't be shy. Don't hold back there. And then how others. The onus is not entirely on Latinas. I will say that there are, perceptions and microaggressions that Latinas face in the workforce. And we need allies to call that out. We need to be heard. I speak with a lot of very senior, I work with Latinas in the C-suite and Latinas on corporate boards. And they tell me that, one, along their journeys, they have faced microaggressions. One Latina told me that, she built an investment portfolio. This is in the finance sector. And yet sometimes when she still walks in that room into a meeting, she's told, oh, hey, can you clean up the table? I mean, this is real stuff that's happening because people's perceptions of Latinas is, fuels how people view us and how they react. Now, in that case, the person who made a mistake and said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," you're part of the team and not, the cleanup crew here. The fact of the matter is that there is real perceptions and biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious biases, and that is fueled by a lot of the perceptions. So we need to have allies and allyship, checking on that. Others also, when they see this, call it out. That's just one example of, the microaggressions I'm getting. By the way, I'm really proud of a lot of my members and members who are Latinas. They spoke out recently in an article in the USA Today to talk about some of the experiences climbing that ladder. And I encourage everyone to look up this article because we now have a Latina CEO of a Fortune 100 company, but it has been years. And historically, there has only been 3. So these Latinas are speaking out, and the more that we tell our stories, and, I think it will become more relevant. In the USA Today article, one of our members recounted how, she was being promoted to another role, and she had a meeting with her supervisor. And getting to know the supervisor more, she was talking about her background. She's a very proud Mexican heritage, and she's talking about that. And her supervisor stops her and says, "Wow, I didn't know, and it's a good thing you don't look Mexican." Wow. This is what our women still face today, and it requires a systemic approach. These are systemic issues here. And until they're recognized, until we call them out, we have a responsibility to do that, but we need the allyship. And in this day, when we're focused on what are those barriers, what are the things that hold us back, what are the things that are keeping us from being the most productive in our workforce, there's no place for microaggressions. And let's all stick together and promote each other.
As Latinas, we tend to be very grateful for whatever we're given, right? And that certainly does not help us when it comes to equal pay. As a manager, as a CEO, mentoring a lot of young Latinas during my career, I find that whenever I would offer them a promotion versus the Latino men in the same company, Latinas would say, "Thank you so much. You won't regret this. I'm going to work harder," even when you're not asking them to work harder. And whatever it was that you would offer as a raise, they would be happy and grateful. Sort of like that's a rule, happy and grateful. And I'm in that exact same boat. I get very anxious negotiating, whether it's a salary, whether it's any other form of compensation, equity, etc. I'm not great at doing that. I still get this stomach ache because I can hear my mom and I can hear my abuelita just saying, "Calladita te ves más bonita," be grateful for what you're given, keep your head down. So that doesn't help us when it comes to negotiating in the workplace. I think the best thing that I've done early on in my career is align myself with a male ally. Even since I started a radio show in my teens, I had a male colleague who confided in me how much they were paying him and that I should ask at least for the same. And that's happened in other jobs. And even as an advisor, even as a board member, having that white ally that is willing to share with you what is that compensation that they are getting to make sure you have that in check is incredibly valuable. I know it shouldn't be on us, but while the system changes, we certainly need to find allies and advocate for ourselves for what we deserve that is absolutely fair.
Allyship is wonderful. Action is better. I'd like to touch upon 3 different ways that you can reduce bias. First, recognize your biases. From accent bias to affinity bias to maternal bias, Latinas are facing all sorts of biases in the workplace. It's important for you to educate yourself on biases, and one tool you can use is the 50 Ways to Fight Bias program here at Lean In. My personal story of maternal bias is this. About 10 years ago, I had my first child and went out on maternity leave. And while I was out of the office, my colleague, who was a white male working with the same audience as I, shared with my leadership team that as a Latina, I may not want to come back to work, as I may want to focus on taking care of my new child. That was incorrect. I never expressed that to that individual. I never expressed that to my leadership. However, my leadership took that information and gave my job away to that person. So I came back 6 weeks later to a brand new job where my efforts from the previous 5 years were handed to someone else. And that was a terrible experience. Another thing you can do is debias your hiring and promotion processes. Ways in which you can do that include establishing clear criteria for hiring, for promotions, and for performance reviews. You should also highly consider bringing more voices into your interviewing process. As a Latina, if you're coming into an organization and evaluating if this is the right organization for you, it's important to see yourself represented. So when you're planning out your interview process, make sure that you include individuals from across the organization that bring different perspectives and have different backgrounds. Lastly, it's important to invest time. Bringing people from all sorts of backgrounds to your organization will take time. It will take time to promote those opportunities, to build those relationships, and that time is going to be an excellent investment for you. Lastly, create community. Latinas are super community focused. It's important for you to create and empower and fund and reward the work of employee resource groups. This way, they can create a safe and protected space for Latinas to talk about the issues that they're facing in the workplace, to seek mentorship, and to take action.